Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Benhur. So the topic that I'm covering today is the importance of clarity in UX research. Um, I found the need to go into this further in this presentation because I've seen that even in my experience, every time it's not only just as designers, it could be people who are managing a product or solving a problem or developers or designers. When we've been given a task, most of us get into it by just being told what to do, and then we just start off with working. But that's not the ideal way to go forward, and that's the reason I picked this topic called the importance of clarity in UX research. In very simple, in very simple words, it's just understanding what the problem is or what the goal is that we're trying to achieve. Um, because the problem really is we rarely step back to see the full picture on what really is going on, and that's why clarity matters. Because without it, even the best of work that we do can head in the wrong direction. So before I go further into it, I wanted to give a very nice example of how this can turn out to be wrong if we don't proceed with clarity. And the example is the example of metaverse. And I'm sure most of us have heard of metaverse a couple of years ago. Mark Zuckerberg, post COVID, wanted to start something um, where he collaborated with reality worlds, where he expected all of us to live in a digital or an augmented reality or a virtual reality world. And that really didn't work out because um, he did not really understand the need of the user. So the cost of not having clarity, and which implies that the users really didn't need it, cost him about $45 billion. And even though this product was released, there was very low adoption. Engagement of users was not even up to mark. They also found out that the cost of hardware and the equipment to have these was too high and not affordable for most users. So, when we see all of these things where the product was hyped and I would say overpromised, where they said you could shop in the metaverse, you could attend events or sporting events in the metaverse. So this overpromised reality was really under delivered, and that cost them about $45 billion and a 667 billion drop in market value. They also had to lay off 11,000 employees because of what happened, and it was simply because they did not have clarity. Eventually, Meta had to transition or shift towards other priorities like AI and move away from the metaverse. And that's basically what I wanted to talk about today. It's that, like the failure that Metaverse had, our assumptions are always one thing, but the real world is totally another thing. Many times when we start working, um, whatever role that we're into, we go with a very narrow mindset, thinking this is the way to solve a certain problem. But the truth is, the real world must be something else. So it's always important to get out of your own shoes and get into the user's shoes and see what really is their experience, and how we can get into their world and understand what the challenges are. And to bridge this gap is why we need clarity. And what we also call as research is the only way to bridge this gap. So the question is, why do we need to do research, and how do you do research? You do research very simply to get clarity. Any step in the UX research process that we take, it could be user personas or a competitive analysis or empathy mapping. You take each and every one of these. The bottom line is we're doing all of this to gain clarity. So when we want to achieve this clarity, we do research. And how do you do this research? You plan, you figure out your questions, you gather data, and you analyze data. That's very simply what research is. To simplify it even further, I have categorized them into three very broad steps. And those three steps are to plan and align. This is something that comes before you go in and gain that clarity, which is finding the truth. Once you find the truth and you get the clarity, you turn those insights and whatever you have learned into actions. So, um, starting off with step one, we're going with planning and aligning. So, this is something that's done internally. You could be working in any field that you're in. If there is no alignment within the team, the members of the team are basically headed to the wrong direction. So step one is aligning with the team, and that comes with defining a clear goal. So this could be your colleagues, your team members, or it could also be your stakeholders. So what I mean by defining a clear goal is basically having a collective shared vision. um, if all of us can't have a defined goal that we're all striving towards, um, we're all going in different directions. So defining the clear goal. In other words, what I mean is, what is the burning question? What is the purpose of doing this research? What is the bigger picture? We could ask questions like, do they want customer growth, or do they want increased revenue? Do they want customer loyalty, or do they just want efficiency? What is the burning question that must be defined, and a clear goal must be defined. Once you do that, you get on the same page. All of us in the team are headed towards that goal, are striving towards that goal. We're all on the same page, and we all have the shared reality. Once this is done, we move on to planning together. This is very important, because this is what sets up for your clarity. This is what sets up for finding the truth. And here you ask all sorts of questions within the team members and gather inputs. Questions like, what do we need to know? Are there any pain points? Are there any assumptions that we're making? Um, are there any unknowns that we need to go and find out? These are all things that we need to understand. And in this phase, it is very important to have the stakeholders involved right at the start. As early as possible, having the stakeholders involved in your planning and aligning step is very important, because most times the experts of the product that you're building is most likely the stakeholder, and they are the ones that can already give you some insights that we might not have. And some of those insights could be business goals. This is the time to plan and decide on what the constraints are. Because many times as researchers, there's no limit. If we don't know what the goal is, if we don't know how much research is enough research, we can just keep going. So understanding what constraints are. Sometimes there are technical constraints. So any usability problems? Are there any reviews? Are there any observations that we already have? These are all things that stakeholders might know, and can be discussed in the planning phase. Once that's done, we'll have a lot of things with us, a lot of inputs from the planning phase. And very simply, these inputs can be put into three buckets. One is assumptions, the other is questions, and the last one is observations. So if, for example, we're taking an example of an e-commerce company, an assumption could be, users want to see reviews, but it's just an assumption. We don't have solid proof for why users want to see reviews. There could be questions like, what triggers them to use our platform? What drives their decision? These are all questions. There could be observations like, we've seen customers reduce their product to cart conversions. We've seen drop-offs in cart. These are all observations, and we have all of these assumptions, questions, and observations. We're ready to conclude with step one and move on to actually finding the truth. And planning and aligning is that important, because if we don't have this setup, there's no point in finding the truth, because everyone who's planning to find the truth are all headed in the wrong direction. Why is planning and aligning important? I have a very nice example of this. It's about NASA. I read this about NASA a couple of years ago, that NASA tried to release a spacecraft. In 1998, they launched it, and the mission of NASA was to basically study the climate in planet Mars. So the name of their spacecraft was the Mars Climate Orbiter. Um, so the whole aim was to study Martian climate, and it acts as a communication relay between Earth and Mars. So in 1999, just when they were inserting the spacecraft into the orbit, they noticed that the spacecraft lost communication, and eventually it got destroyed. There was a analysis that was done on what really happened, and they found out that the navigation team at NASA were expecting data to come in metric units, but NASA was working with the building team, which was Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin provided calculations in English units. And because the math was off, the trajectory was off by almost 4.45 newtons. And instead of the spacecraft going into a 150-kilometer orbit, it dipped to about 60 kilometers of in orbit, and it couldn't survive and got destroyed. So they did a very detailed analysis after this on what really went wrong. They concluded it in a very simple one line, and they said a simple data contract between teams would have acted like guardrails and would have stopped this problem. So they said it was a very clear failure of collaborative planning and shared clarity. It was very clear that they missed the planning and aligning phase of sending the spacecraft into the orbit. And to summarize, step one, we'd have to define a clear goal, understand what the burning question is, get on the same page. If all of the team members and the stakeholders are all headed in the same direction with that shared reality, we can then plan together and ask the right questions and gather observations, assumptions, questions, and then move forward to step two, which is finding the truth. And this is the main part of the presentation that I wanted to talk about. This is how we gain clarity. And finding the truth is step two. So we start by defining user groups. Now, this depends on the kind of project that you're working on or the kind of product that you're building. You will have an idea of who the users are. So in our example, we're taking the example of, again, an e-commerce company that's looking to increase their revenue. So for example, I've shown 5 user groups here of people who use an e-commerce platform. We could have first-time visitors. There could be a group that's new customers, and then another group called frequent buyers. We could also have lapsed users, those who were using the platform for some time and then just stopped using it after a while. We'd also have another group called cart abandoners. Once we have this group, it's the next step is not just asking the questions and moving on with research. It's to actually filter out the right users. It's to recruit the right users, because most times when you're in a research phase, you want a user base so that you can go back to the same users, conduct your study, ask questions. If you come across an hurdle or a challenge, this user base you can reach out to at any time and get your questions answered. And how do we recruit the right users? By using screeners. A screener is nothing but a form. It's a short questionnaire that filters out the actual users that you want. They are like the representative users that you need. What basically goes on in a screener is who they are, what they do, experience level. Since we already have certain user groups, we'll have experience of how much they've been in that group and how much they can handle it. If they're going to be your user base, you want to also know if they can articulate their experience well. And then once you do this, you also have disqualifiers. You will filter out a lot of people that you don't need, especially when it comes to an e-commerce company, for example. Even most of us on this call right now, majority would most probably be using an e-commerce. But are we the right users for the study? We won't know unless we've been put through a screener. It matters because wrong participants equals wrong truth, and we don't want to get wrong data into our hands and analyze the wrong data. It also saves time and money. So recruiting the right users is also very important. And then comes the most important, which is asking the right questions. So many times, including me, we're going into interviewing users or customers with a very closed and narrowed mindset. Early on, I would ask questions that I think I already have an answer to, but really you're not solving a problem when you ask such questions. And so there's a very clear difference between what a research question is and what an interview question is. Research question is what you need to learn, instead of trying to read out from a script of questions that you already have. Research questions help you understand unmet needs. It helps you learn what the customers are trying to achieve. It's not just about getting answers, but it's about understanding what you don't know. For example, what steps do customers take from search to purchase is a very open-ended question that allows the person on the other side to explain the entire process from start to end. Instead, if you start off with an interview question that's very straightforward and very narrow, you're not really going to get a very broad answer. So a research question could be questions like what, when, why, how. This enables the user to like speak up, expand, and elaborate and talk about the entire behavior of how they use the product, what the workflow is, instead of very narrow questions. Um, you know, there are also times when I have done interviews and you ask certain questions and the answer could just be good. But it is always important to anticipate such questions and ask further. You can use the words that they use and say, can you tell me more about what was going through your mind? For example, when you dropped off the cart. So there's a clear difference between research question and interview question. And it's always important to start off with a research question and then follow it up with an interview question. Because an interview question is what you ask in order to get more information, right? So avoid asking leading or closed-ended questions at the start. When you ask questions like, do you like our cart page? Most likely you're going to get an answer like, yeah, it's good. So you have very little insight, you have nothing to work on. Instead, if you ask a very broad, open-ended research question, you can have a very predefined, germinating question saying, why do people drop off before completing a purchase? You'll get a couple of answers. You'll sometimes get the entire flow. In this case, we'll have an answer like, if the total ends up being more than I expected on the cart, I leave the cart. So we probe further by asking an interview question. You mentioned you left your cart. What was going through your mind at that moment? He says, I saw delivery fees added at the last step, so I decided not to buy. So these are very common patterns that you see in user interviews. And here, not only have you understood the entire behavior of the user, but you've also understood what exactly is triggering drop-offs, what exactly is costing the company, what exactly is costing them revenue, is costing them a drop-off as a customer. All of this depends on asking the right questions. Most times as researchers, when you're going to understand or ask users about questions, we'll always have a list of questions going, to start off our user interview. And most times that doesn't work because you're really approaching the entire interview with a closed-minded approach, instead of understanding what is really going on. So it's very advisable to start off with a question, get an answer, and follow up on the same question that the user has probably answered. Follow up on what he said. That gives us deeper insight. So um, like the same example that we saw earlier, if you ask a user, do you like our product page? You're going to most likely get an answer saying yes, or yes, it's good. The problem with such a question is, first of all, you have assumed that the user likes your product page. Second of all, the bigger problem is you have assumed that they even saw a product information page or a product details page. There could be chances that the user has not even noticed that there was a product information displayed over there, and you're already headed in the wrong direction. So um, it's always important to have this organic way of conducting your user interviews or asking the right questions and not proceeding in a very linear way. Because when we approach users with or customers with asking the right question, having a good question is actually much more powerful than actually having an answer. So once you have this, you understand that each truth is different. So the example of the picture we saw earlier, the blind and the elephant, I'm sure most of us have heard the story. Um, one is touching the trunk and we see it's a snake. The other one's holding the tail and they say it's a rope. The other one's saying it's a wall. Um, they're not wrong because they're blind. They're just giving us their experience. And when we do more research and we dive deeper and we understand what really is going on, we start to see patterns. We start to see what really is going on and not really isolated truths. So then we move on to the next step, which is looking at real behavior. Because what people say is not always what people do. Many times, you must have uh, seen some examples of when you make a purchase or when you finish a certain process, you get a pop-up on your screen says, how likely are you to recommend this? How have you liked it? And most people just hit 5 stars. More people just say very good. But how likely is it that we're actually going to use the same product as it again? How likely is it that we're actually telling the truth? Uh, Henry Ford has the great quote that said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So looking at real behavior in addition to asking the right questions is very important in finding the truth. The same example, if they say product page looks good, uh, but if you watch their behavior, you see drop-offs are happening when a certain size of a product wasn't available. So these give you actionable insights, saying what they said is not really what they do. So it helps you probe further, right? So an example of this is Walmart. So Walmart conducted a research a couple of years ago, and the research was they basically wanted to modernize their stores, their aisles. So they ran a research and asked customers if they preferred less cluttered aisles, very minimal looking aisles in stores, and everyone said yes, great, that would be very nice. Uh, and once they did that, based on that research, they implemented it, and immediately they saw a 15% reduction in sales on their shelves. They reorganized the stores, they simplified layouts. All of that just increased their revenue by 15% because customers actually ended up buying less. So what we learned from this is they asked very closed-ended questions, did not watch real behavior. Their research went around, would you like this, instead of um, actually understanding what the user really needs, without actually anchoring them into the real context or behavior. So observational or behavioral research, in addition to asking questions, is very, very important. And that's how we find the truth. To summarize this, we'd have to define user groups, filter them out to have a good user base. You learn to ask the right questions, and then you start to see patterns. And using those patterns, you start to see their actual user behavior, what really is going on, and how I can conclude in finding the truth. And now that we have all the insights, we then move on to turning these insights into actions. So most times when we have a lot of insights as researchers, uh, we come back with a bunch of uh, data, uh, and especially when you're doing a couple of days or weeks or months of research, you come back with a lot of insights and a lot of problems, a lot of pain points that users are really facing, and this uh, communicating this with the team and even prioritizing what is needed is very essential. And that's why it's important to not fix everything at once. A nice principle to follow is this Moscow analysis that you see right here. You see that there are certain must-haves that you need to solve for, and then there are certain should-haves. They're not very essential, but they are important, so you should have them. There are also nice to have, so could have in your product. And there are also something that you really don't need, so you don't want them. So this analysis can really help us understand what is priority, what level of importance we need to give and prioritize in solving the problem. Because many times if we're just trying to solve by improving the look and feel of a checkout screen, instead of actually addressing the user problem on why they're abandoning a cart when fees appear late, we're not really solving the problem. So in this case, if we find that users are actually abandoning the cart, a possible fix could be include delivery fees upfront on the product page. So there are chances that you retain a customer by having this insight instead of just building something that does not really make sense. Now, um, now that we've done all of these steps from step 1 to step 3, we have um, planning and aligning, and then we have finding the truth. And once we find the truth, we turn these insights into actions, where we're prioritizing the real problem. We have almost everything that we need, right? And this is where we communicate what we have found with clarity as well, because clarity is not just in understanding what the problem is. Clarity is also about communicating what we found, all the insights that we have, communicating them with the team, with the stakeholders, right? So, for example, there are research decks that look like this. There are 40 slide research decks that that are presented, and people say they get some sort of analysis paralysis by looking at such large decks of research and data, and it's not really digestible and nobody can work with it. Instead, it's always advisable to have a one page or a two-page summary with the goal that you defined in step 1, everything that you found in step 2, if they're the pains, the problems, the findings, and what the next steps are. An example is we could have a very simple one-line goal, what the 3 key findings or pain points or problems are. Decisions are who's going to take ownership of each of the next steps. It could be design, development, or any other process, the next steps, who's going to do what. So um, this is very important in step 3, which is prioritizing the real problem and communicating these findings with clarity. Because most of us are going to push forward and just try and solve all the problems that we see, but choosing the right problem, defining what it is that we exactly want to solve, communicating it very clearly with our team members or stakeholders is very important, and then addressing what the next steps are all very important things, because this is where we'll have practical objectives on what exactly needs to be done, and these objectives drive the execution, right? So um, that's the third step. How we can turn these insights into actions is by prioritizing the problem. Um, we make sure that we are not solving everything at once. We try and make sure that everything that we have so far, all the insights that we have, are communicated very clearly. All the findings are very clearly communicated with clarity to our team members. And then we move on to problem solving. We start solving the problems. It could be design or doing more tests. This helps us gain the clarity. So very simply, to summarize, how does clarity drive good design? These are the 3 steps on how clarity can drive good design. As designers or researchers or anybody doing the work that we've been assigned to do, uh, we've just been told what to do. And if we don't really understand or gain clarity on what it is that we're doing, you're basically failing in delivering a good product. Because if you're trying to create a product for on what the users have spoken about, uh, you need to understand and you need to have that clarity. Otherwise, you're just guessing and hoping for the best design practices to implement, hoping to just use the right heuristics and deliver a product. And that's how not so good products are still in the market out there. Many times we wonder why, with so much of resources and AI and internet availability and good design principles out there, we still face bad products around us. There are certain platforms like web apps, websites that we use that are really not usable at all. And that's very simply because the people who worked on it did not know what exactly the user needs are, what they really need to solve for. They did not have the clarity on how to go ahead and solve the problem. And this is where human judgment comes in, because questions like, can AI replace UX research as a whole? possibly parts of it, but the places where you need human judgment, this is something that AI really can't do, because this is where we're reading between the lines, we're spotting emotions, we're looking at real behavior, we're understanding what the context is, what the hidden meanings are. So AI can be really useful in analyzing data much faster than all of us can, but it can't feel why something matters for users. Um, so this is very important when we're building a product. It is the planning and aligning phase, finding the truth, and that finding the truth is the crux of the whole presentation, which is to gain clarity. If we're proceeding uh, into a project or into whatever it is that we're building without understanding what really is going on, we end up it ends up costing everybody around us, and it can end up being a disaster, just like we saw with NASA or Metaverse or even Walmart. It's very important to understand the context or get clarity. Many of us have seen memes or pictures on the internet where you zoom in and there's a line, um, and it looks very crowded. But you zoom out and you see it's a free ice cream day. It's not really a problem of bad checkout and large number of people and nobody to serve them. It's actually a problem of increased demand, and it's a free ice cream day. So when you zoom out and when you see the picture from afar off and you understand what the real context is, you get clarity. And when you approach a problem after you plan and align uh, in that manner, you end up asking the right questions. You end up asking very open-ended questions. You end up asking research questions and not closed-ended leading questions that just give you short, straightforward answers. Once you have this, you can turn all of them into actions, these insights into actions. And that's all there is to research, because once we see the users as solution, as the source of information, then we can build better products and we can have a better time doing and building these products. So um, that's my time. Thank you.